Hello, everybody. Welcome to the program. My name is Chris Spangle. Thank you for joining me. It's a little bit of a different episode. I am hosting this podcast, but it's not quite the Chris Spangle Show. So I have been, for almost a year now, hosting a new podcast called Hearted Indy. Now, don't let the title fool you. It is people from Indianapolis, but I think the subject is very evergreen. So about a year ago, I may have talked a little bit about it. I should put the 2 or 3 podcast episodes about friendship that I did, one with Jeremiah and a couple others. It's kind of outlining my theory of podcasting and what has made We Are Libertarians so special, what has made the Chris Spangle Show less special because there's been less friendship than the We Are Libertarians shows. But podcasting to me, like I'm sitting in my podcast studio. I record the Pat Down out of here. I record the Chris Spangle Show out of here. If you're in Indianapolis, it's in Fountain Square. And if you're a podcaster locally, you can rent this studio, by the way. Just send me a message. But the point of this podcast studio is to get people together and allow a creative space for people to podcast with their friends. Because I think friendship is really important. And I think if you're a longtime listener to the program, you understand that with things like the pool party. If you've been in the Facebook group, there is a podcast group called Fans of We Are Libertarians. I think it's called the Walnut Society. And we've been having quite the battle the last week. If you've listened for all 14 years, you know how difficult Chris Galt can be. Chris Galt, classic 2013 Chris Galt tantrums in the Facebook group this week. It's been incredible. And he's left We Are Libertarians again and started his own Facebook group called Galt's Gulch, which I will one day conquer. Because, frankly, I do think we own it. The people in there are from We Are Libertarians. It's not his. All that aside. So back to what this episode is. So this is a preamble to the podcast that I do called Hearted Indy. And so about a year ago, I started doing this podcast project and creating some community around podcasting. And I went through this program called Builders and Backers to kind of like ideate some business ideas that I had that have kind of come to fruition, which led to this podcast studio, and helped me really get clear on what I believe podcasting's important point is, which is friendship. So out of that process, I met a guy at church named Greg Enos, who is just a fantastic guy who knows everybody in town. And he started a group called Citizen 7 with Don Palmer. Google it. It's a really cool organization. It's guys who care about it's Christian men who care about the city, who get together for 2 purposes. Friendship, to build relationships amongst men in the city, and then to use those relationships to do good in the city. So I think if you understand anything about me and about this program and things we've talked about, it's about men's health, it's about men's friendships, it's about relationships, it's about civil society, it's about creating things of value, helping people, charity, nonprofit organization. It's just a really cool organization that I've been glad to be a part of. And they said, hey, would a podcast work? I said, yeah, let's try it. So we've been doing podcasts for about a year, and it's really, really been great. And the goal is to take 2 friends who are both successful people in their own right, who care about the community, who have healthy relationships in their life, romantic relationships, business relationships, and they talk about their friendship, they talk about their projects. And I think if you like this show and you like my message, you will like that podcast. And so I wanted to put this in the feed and say, hey, check out Hearted Indy. It's once a month. There's just a few, so you're not, in for like a once a day, once a week podcast even. But I think it's such a healthy, awesome thing to see these healthy friendships between guys being modeled by other people. And I think if you are a person who struggles with loneliness, who struggles with connection, you're going to find a lot of benefit in this. Because I have a lot of friends. Like I'm not bragging or anything, but I find myself every episode going, man, I need to be more intentional about reaching out to friends, caring more about the people in my circle. And I think it's just such a great thing for me to be called back to that every single month. So go and check it out. Big Hearted Indy. This is, I think, my favorite episode, so that's why I'm putting it in here. It's not the most recent or anything like that. But, so Indy, like Indianapolis, INDY. And really, I think if you just search my name, you may be able to find it. But check it out. Citizen 7 presents Big Hearted Indy. So here it is. All right, take it away, me.
Welcome to Big Hearted Indy, where we empower men in Indianapolis to forge deep connections and impactful lives through authentic friendships and service. Join us as we explore personal growth, community leadership, and the transformative power of living out our faith in action. The podcast is produced by Citizen 7, and it's hosted by Greg Enos, Don Palmer, and I'm Chris Spangle. And our guests today are Rex Fisher and Mark Nottingham. Greg is in California, also watching on Zoom. Just maybe, Greg, if you've got questions, you can type them in the message. And our guest host is Dave Neff. Let's go to Don, if you don't mind handing him that mic, and then you shift over, Dave, and then we'll have Don introduce first Dave Neff. Who is Dave Neff? And then introduce Rex and Mark.
First is Dave Neff started as the boy down the street because he actually grew up on the same street that I lived for 30-some years. And his mother, small world, lived 2 houses from me growing up. And 79th and Westfield Boulevard.
That's Indy for you. Big, small town right there.
It's a big, small town.
Yeah.
So Dave and I, he to me is, Greg and I collaborate a lot, but Dave is my younger collaborator, bridge builder, and a guy that is always saying, sure, let's try that. Let's do that. We can make that happen. So Dave had a background at Exact Target. I got to know him better when he was I would call it co-founder of Edge Mentoring and ran Edge Mentoring, what they did to take that to a new level. Dave and I collaborate on Citizen 7 and really a myriad of things. And Dave and I also enjoyed a mutual friendship, close friendship with Jim Morris. So it seems like a lot of Dave's close friends are my close friends. So we're glad to have you, Dave.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Don just likes me now because I work for his boilers up in West Lafayette, and it's been a fun ride in the last 8-9 months leading Purdue's NIL collective. So we've got football kicking off this weekend, which everybody seems to be pretty excited about. College football's back, but today's not about that. It's about these guys to my left, and I have the pleasure of knowing both of them. One probably a little better than the other. Rex and I go back to your Diginex days, Rex. Oh, yeah. Shout out MS Communications. And then Rex was always great when he had a stint at Shepherd Community Center, helping me bring a crew of employees over, I think from Exact Target back then. And then Rex was on my early Edge Mentoring Advisory Board that we spun up in 2015. He was part of the original board and an early mentor to a group of guys, and I don't see him nearly as often. That was back before I had kids. Now I have 4. And so, but it's great to be back with Rex in this space that he helped build and switchboard. And then, Mark and I have only got together a couple times, but he's a guy that you hear about a lot throughout town, and we'll get into both their stories here. And so maybe I'll kick us off I'd like for each of you, and Rex, we'll start with you, give us a high level overview, a couple minutes on who Rex Fisher is and what is he up to today, just the journey thus far.
Oh, wow. I'd say today I am a husband and a father, and I get to be an entrepreneur here in the city who is trying to tighten up the proximity of my life to as close an analog radius as possible in order to multiply time and be present where I need to, and then to bring good people into places that we need to grow, and then figure out how to resource the goal and get out of the way.
That's great. There's a lot more to that story, which we'll get into. Mark, how about what's the overview of Mark Nottingham? What does our audience need to know?
The first thing, I think, for me is that I'm a husband and dad. My wife, Sarah, we have 4 kids who are currently all between 2 and 11, 3 boys and a girl. We live downtown. I've lived downtown now for, we're not far 20 years. Downtown Indy has been a great place for us. I actually think about vocation and geography intersecting a lot. So I happen to be an entrepreneur who's primarily active in the real estate space, but a lot of my background and my activity, I think, is very much centered in the Indianapolis community.
I'd love for you both maybe to share a little bit. You each had stints in, call it nonprofit ministry work, right? Which I also share from my Edge days and started at the Pacers and then in software. And you don't have this traditional sort of up and to the right, got into this industry right out of school, knew what I wanted to do. Maybe you both could share, Mark, after Penn State, where you went to school, just how you got involved with Young Life and how that shaped just your outlook, your worldview. And Rex, similarly, your time at Shepherd really had you dug into the Near East Side, and now what you've both have been doing over the last decade in Fountain Square, where we sit today.
Let me take that one. Don actually plays a little bit of a role in this for me. So my background is I grew up around small business. My dad and my dad's dad were small business owners in the automobile sales and service business. So that is the environment that I had seen. I went to school, I ended up studying business, but God did a lot of things in my life during college, most of them through the organization of Young Life. And I think when I graduated college, as I look back on this, if I take an honest and reasonably critical view of where I was, I think the perspective of me as a 22-year-old was that if you were attempting to follow Jesus, that meant that you worked in vocational ministry. So I think my call to work for Young Life was accurate. I think that's what God wanted for me when I graduated from college, but I don't think I had a very mature view of how a Christian should think about vocation. I think vocational ministry is a huge calling. I think it's founded in the scriptures. It's worthwhile. I admire a lot of people that do it, but I think for me, that calling was a bit more of a default. 4 years in, was working on a seminary degree, had worked for Young Life, had a great experience, but couldn't shake this reality that I think I was built to be a business owner. And I had some really good examples and mentors, and I would count Don on a very small list here of people working in the business community. Think about the kingdom. They were impacting the world around them in line with the kingdom of Jesus in really significant ways. That was an eye-opener for me that caused me to rethink, okay, but what am I built for? So I joke about it. I tried to move, like to run away, I guess you could say. I'd been around small business. That was my education. It was like I worked for 4 or 5 years to not do that, to then realize, no, I think this is how I'm built. It's what I want to do. And I think for me personally, it's the way in which my giftings, my skills, my resources, my network could most impact the kingdom.
Can you talk about how you feel about vocation now? How did that mature? What does that look like beyond what you just said?
Yeah, I appreciate that you assume that it's matured since then.
We're all a work in progress.
Yeah. The things that I think I view now. When I was 22, I probably viewed vocation in this category of what does God have for our life? And I probably tended to view God as having this very specific thing, the person you were supposed to marry, the place you were supposed to live, the job you were supposed to have. I don't hold that view of God's sovereignty and calling in our life now. I actually think it's more like God invests certain things. He builds certain principles. He calls you to certain types of behaviors and says, this is what my kingdom looks like. Now go and find a way to align yourself to that. And so I think I could be in hundreds of different vocations. It just so happened to be that my time and place presented opportunity to be an entrepreneur in certain fields. So I think God calls us to a type of life and behavior. I view vocation to be something that we're just constantly trying to figure out what aligns the most with what God's given me. So that turned out to be entrepreneurship and real estate for me. So I think I take a less specific view than I did then.
And Rex, real quick before we come to you, Why don't you, Mark, go a little bit deeper? I know your family, I believe over in Richmond, Indiana, had some car dealerships right back in the day. And so I know you and your brother have Matt's, right? Give our audience, for those, I think a lot of people that know you two think of what started as Nottingham Realty Group, then Plaque Collective, now At Properties. You've got your fingers in a number on a coffee shop. Maybe just articulate for our audience what that entrepreneurial journey's been like and the things that are part of that portfolio today.
For better or worse, I think a couple things that I inherited from my dad and from his dad. I'm not afraid to take risks. I don't mind failure. Problem solving and hard work is something that's very attractive to me. I will admit now, to a fault, I think at times I've been too quick to take risks, too quick to try things, perhaps too quick to work at times. But if those are your tendencies, entrepreneurship's a great field. So honestly, though, every one of those, they were situational, Dave. So it wasn't, I never had a desire to be in the car business, to be in the coffee shop space, to own real estate, to be a real estate broker. They were functions of, I am attracted to being in control of my work environment as much as possible. And I really enjoy working with other people. And each of those fields lets you do those to some extent.
Yeah. That's good. Rex, what about you? Give our audience a little bit more of your journey. And when we met, I think 2010, around then, you were part of Emmis and kind of had a call on you to go do something pretty radical at the time. I don't know what you would have been, maybe 30 years old, to go work at Shepherd Community with a young family. So maybe tell us what prompted that and the impact it's had on your life and what you're up to today.
Sure. So I had spent at that time almost 10 years in sports and entertainment all over the U.S. and was fascinated by the way that sports and concert touring and different types of performance and venue location impacted a city and a neighborhood. And that got me to drill down into what makes a neighborhood a great neighborhood and a robust neighborhood. And initially, really from an economic standpoint. And that pretty quickly led me to get interested in acquiring real estate within Indianapolis and Fountain Square. At that time, when I started pressing into that, I was about 25 years old. Was a pretty appealing place to start that journey. And pretty quickly after that, about 18 years ago, we moved down to the neighborhood. We're still here today, have no plans of going anywhere. What we learned, my wife and I, and moving here, what we could have never prepared for. We felt a pull here because there was both opportunity and need. And I think we went into both very idealistically, if not quite ignorantly, but with great intention. And we learned the hard way. We were the only legally occupied home for two houses in any direction when we first moved down. And we had to navigate some difficulty of just not understanding our neighbors to the degree that I think was helpful for us and them. And at the same time, we just started learning a ton through a critical mass of experience and a lot of failure. We helped start a number of initiatives in the neighborhood that I think we had great hope for, and yet we just did not understand how to be sustainably effective within a diversified community of need. And so for 3 years, we spun our wheels a lot. But in that time, what we learned was that our neighbors who just had very different stories than we did had some things going for them that we didn't. And we learned a lot about relational wealth. And I'm not kidding. I would see with some level of regularity our neighbors screaming at each other in the street or in a physical altercation, and 12 to 24 hours later be sitting on the porch laughing. And that just can absolutely perplex me. And this is really came on. There was a couple living on the corner just on the same block that got in a fight, and she got the girlfriend got her boyfriend's keys, and it had to be a late 70s like Lincoln, and she drove the car through the living room of the house. And there's a giant screaming fit and whatnot. And the next day, they and both of their families are out at the house reframing the house that had been. And after 3 years of, I think, just feeling like we had spun our wheels and being we had learned some stuff, but pretty tired. We were at this fork in the road where we had to decide if this was an experiment that we just didn't have any more gas for, or we weren't in a place to make the kind of impact we had hoped for, or we needed to double down in our areas of greatest efficiency. And those areas were, one, our ignorance, our lack of understanding about our neighbors and community development and sustainable health within this place. And two was proximity. We had an address. I was traveling all over the U.S. about at least half the month, and my wife was teaching in Carmel, and we were starting a family. And so we just didn't have much time during the best hours of our day in the place we were trying to make an impact. And so that was about 2011. We made the decision to start to look for opportunities with organizations who had shown a sustainable impact in the city and within the community. And my wife ended up at the Oaks Academy as the Brookside chapter was opening, Brookside School. And I ended up over at Shepherd Community, heading up fundraising within that organization. And that was a tremendous point of learning and getting around a group of people, a board, volunteers, but also the program families, and just seeing how this organization and the people of this organization engaged in impact. I learned a ton from Jay Height. I think he's one of the most strategic thinkers within how to execute mission and engage others within the places that are most relevant to them and helping them take their developmental steps. And it was 4 years that were a lot of hard work. And I'll say where I was really not great at maintaining my own work-life boundaries, but unbelievably impactful. And my wife similarly at the Oaks. As a matter of fact, today we have one kid who is 7 years old when I started at Shepherd in program, who's now working with us every day and in transaction management. And she's amazing. And another who I think joined us when he was 12, who's now one of our top leasing agents and starting out his realty career within the last 12 months. So I had that experience. Then I was at a fundraiser with my wife for Camptown that we'd been invited by some friends who were about 15 years ahead of us. And out of nowhere, the friend of mine who had invited us turned and said, "Don't be an absentee husband and father. You have a lot of stuff that you're doing. I wasn't there when my kids were growing up. You need to be around." And our eyes locked, and I'm looking at him, and the one thing I knew I wasn't going to do was look at my wife.
Had she been mentioning something similar?
Only for a decade, right? And we already were feeling this pull that we knew I was going to be able to do more. We were going to be able to do more together in the for-profit world than vocationally in the nonprofit, just from our makeup and strengths and passions. And we walked out of that, and my wife said, "We need to talk," and didn't even get, and I said, "I know, I'm done." But we knew we were heading into this next chapter. And like the next week, Mark calls up. We had an initial meeting and says, "Hey, you should really come over and do this. Let's hop over and join the brokerage and basically come join the party." And I did, and have really had to spend a lot of time learning about how to create the margin for presence coming out of that, and then to use that time building within relationships and whatnot.
I think that's something that probably, I would guess, most of our listeners struggle with. That calling, the desire to build and create, but then also you are the head of a household. You have kids that depend on you, a wife that you have to date and love and be present for. How have you two found that balance? And what were some of the struggles to get there that you had those wins and said, all right, this is fantastic?
I haven't found it yet. I think it's a constant improvement process. I think there's like one stage in life where I was married without kids. And in that stage, you think boundaries are challenging. And then you have kids and your business looks different. It's more demanding. We've had to wrestle through that time isn't the only resource. I think I've probably been personally better about margin of time and not dedicating, at least from a visible physical proximity sense, not dedicating too much time to work. For me, it's presence. The challenge for me is that I have to force myself not to think about work. I haven't been diagnosed. I'm likely addicted to work. And so I think the process for me hasn't been, am I physically present? Because the answer is, I think I'm likely physically present plenty. It's, am I mentally, emotionally, spiritually present in that moment? And that's hard. So my wife's called me out on this. Most of the time she does it graciously. So we are still trying to find that rhythm. Now my wife's vocation is that she homeschools our kids. I think the same thing is true for her. So like, where are those boundaries between the different roles we have in life? I think we're in a better place. We've communicated about it. One of the things maybe that we'll get into is having the privilege of getting to choose who I work with and partner with. I'm around people that, generally speaking, set good examples on this, would call me out and would support me in dedicating time to family. I don't have a partner or a coworker that I could imagine giving me a hard time about prioritizing my family. And I think I would reciprocate that. So who I'm surrounded with has been very helpful. Ask me again in a decade and I'll say that 2024 Mark really struggled with this.
Rex?
I think the one thing that helped a ton was a very late ADHD diagnosis at 37. I remember 20 years ago telling my wife, I don't know what's wrong, but something isn't the way most people are, and is a severe executive function challenge. But that that diagnosis helped me understand what I needed to do to move more wisely and be more healthy. I think along with that, when Gabby brings a concern or a way she is feeling towards me or just towards the situation, to get really curious as opposed to really defensive, which really, this was a decade of trial and repeated error, but to not defend in the moment. The best question we had the probably biggest fight of our marriage on New Year's Eve in, I want to say it was 2015. And I just said, how can I help and what do you need? And the fight was over. I had to lay down the defense and needed to step towards her. And I've remembered that's helped me in basically everything I've learned and applied to business that's been productive, I've learned in my marriage. And then I'll tell you the capacity equation. I penned this out about 9 years ago, and I was just sick of not wanting to be around myself. This just anxious, reactive, like emotionally charged individual. And I penned this out, and it has been transformative. And what this is, if you take your financial capacity multiplied by your capacity of time, multiplied by your relational capacity with those who are most intimate and aligned with you and the work you're doing, and just in life, that's going to equal your emotional capacity to take on any challenge and problem. And what I realized there was that, okay, we can make more money. The relational capacity is the most impactful. It takes the longest, and we get no more time. So if that's true, then we need to use our financial wealth to remove things from our time commitment to go build the relational wealth. And if this works out, then that ecosystem should allow the ability to grow capacity and then to budget those resources so that you can be present and face any opportunity or challenge with clarity and not react in the moment without wisdom and presence. And I can tell you, anytime that I am feeling that anxious, it's an overextension of one of those three places that have gone to zero. And now that multiplier of zero has wiped out my emotional margin.
That's great advice. Dave?
Yeah, this is some really great stuff, guys. And before I forget, Rex, thank you to Gabby, because I have two kids at Oaks Brookside now, third grade and first grader. So I had forgotten that she helped get that school going in 2011, 2012. It's a special place, and Lord willing, we'll have two more kids going there as well. You guys have talked a lot about these resources that we all have. Time, money, attention was touched on, but I think of, you called it presence, Mark, and our time is finite, right? I think we can all agree on that. Money, you can, in theory, make more of it, right? Is it unlimited? We could debate that, but you can always probably make more by working harder, by investing in this deal, whatever. But our attention is something that I'm hearing you, Mark, say, and I struggle with this as well. Work is a vice, and it's probably a socially acceptable vice, right? It's far more socially acceptable than alcohol or drugs or pornography. And so it's easy to, when I get home from the day, I put my phone away in a drawer, but then I feel the pull of checking it 20 minutes later, right? That's my attention going from what it should be, probably my wife and kids, right after being gone for 9-10 hours to, why do I need to check the siren call of an email or a text or that sort of thing? So I just wanted to maybe hammer that, because I think that currency of attention, especially for those of us who still have young kids at home. I have 4 that are 8 and under, so I'm in a similar boat. At an older mentor in town say, right now your access to your kids is at an all-time high and your personal free time is at an all-time low, but that pendulum is going to shift before long, and your personal free time will start to come back, but your access to your kids is going to start to, it's not even 18, right? It's more probably 14, 15 once they start high school and they want to hang out with other friends. Rex, maybe you see that since you've got kids that are slightly older. We got maybe 15 minutes here for some Q&A. Let's get into your guys' partnership. How'd you meet? Who introduced you? Mark, what prompted you to call Rex in 2015 and say, hey, you want to come over? What did you see in him? I just am curious how the genesis of your partnership started. And obviously you guys have had a great run these last 9-10 years.
I think I was giving you the opportunity to invest in a great program at Shepherd Community. That was great. Thanks, by the way.
Yeah, we met at a Shepherd event, and I think it was you joked about the nature of Indianapolis. I think even when we met, we both had this awareness of, it's actually odd we hadn't met for as much as our networks and lives and interests and passions overlapped. So I think we really hit it off quickly because of how much we had in common. I think the timing was pretty interesting in terms of where the real estate brokerage was, where the real estate space in Indianapolis was, and what Rex shared earlier about what was happening in his vocational life. So I think a function of time and place that really quickly we began working together. Rex, believe it or not, this is an interesting side note, Rex was the first brand new real estate agent that our company took on. Up until that point, we didn't feel like we had the capacity to help someone start their career. There's a lot of training involved. For whatever reason, we felt like Rex would be fine. He'd been around real estate for a long time. But yeah, pretty quickly, it was apparent that the way in which we thought about business was very similar. The way in which we wanted to use our resources was similar. And we were already in the same industry. So it made sense for us to partner. There was more conversation than this makes sense. But I think that's really what happened.
How do your respective strengths complement each other? And then, partnership dynamics are everything, right? In a business and who you team up with. So there's had to have been conflict over the last 9-10 years between the two of you. So follow-up question to how do your strengths complement? How do you guys work through conflict? And maybe if you've got even a specific example or two, that'd be great to hear.
Usually Mark wants to go settle on the golf course, and that doesn't work out too well for me. But no, I think we converse very well. I don't know that Mark and I have ever had a toe-to-toe fight. I really appreciate that. It's one of the things that I really valued, and is just, I think, a culture of the organization that Mark has just led out of who he is as a person. The decision to stay curious in conflict, and when I'm not aligned with what Mark is communicating and what he sees ahead, I want to get really curious, because it's always, there's something I don't understand. And I tell Mark regularly and others, you can tell me I'm wrong. You can push back. I want you to. And Mark does a really good job of doing that with conviction, but not condemnation. And I respected that as an agent in the brokerage. I respected that when I was engaging with him about investment and Shepherd's programs and impact, and even more so as a co-owner with him.
I would agree. We actually, while we don't see things eye to eye all the time immediately, I think by God's grace, we have not had what I would describe as argument or significant conflict. I was reading some of those before, and I was thinking about this. We're very similar. We have some different strengths, different weaknesses, but our strengths and weaknesses, they're not like yin and yang. They're actually very much overlapped with each other. We tend to be good at the same things. We tend to be not good at the same things. If you defined a partnership based upon the financial production of a company, I could imagine somebody saying, oh, you guys, you're actually so much alike that at times maybe the production of the company suffers from that, because you have the same blind spots and you're really good at the same things. We've been successful. It's been a great partnership on the kind of financial ledger, but I think it's part of the reason that we've worked so well together. We just tend to see things in the same way. And when we don't, Rex is a pretty easy guy to get along with. And if he holds a conviction really strongly, you will know it. But I said something similar. I would say Rex is good at holding a conviction strongly, but yet doing it with an open hand, if that illustration makes sense. He'll speak his mind, he'll say his piece, but really can identify with the other person's perspective well. So we now in some other ventures have multiple other partners. And I don't know if this mirrors in your experience, but I think having other partnerships now with Rex has further illustrated for me how much we are alike.
What would you guys say you've both obviously hired a bunch of different people, you're high capacity leaders. I would love to hear what's a secret sauce for each of you, whether, hey, we look for this when we're out hiring, or even how you manage your time, how you manage to keep all these plates spinning. Maybe give us a piece of wisdom or two just that you've earned through your experiences, a secret sauce.
And one of the things that come to mind, both in our partnerships and some of the things that I've done separately and Rex has done separately, high quality people around you. Neither of us are in an industry that has a really complex profile of knowledge that you need. We're in human industries, and the right partnerships make a huge difference. And so I'll just give you an example here. I've been involved in Foundry Provisions, a coffee shop here in town that we opened 12 years ago. It would be foolish to attempt to take any credit for the success of that coffee shop, because it's not true. From day one, my neighbor, longtime friend, fellow churchgoer, Kimmy Burton, has been the 100%. The reason that shop has been, I think, a really great add to the neighborhood and a successful business. So if we did one thing right in that business, it was, Kimmy seems like a great person to partner with on this. And for 12 years, she's been an all-star. So that would be the theme for me of the plates spinning. It's because there's good people holding them. I would be a terrible operator of a coffee shop. Kimmy's amazing at it.
You're looking for the raw material, somebody that's coachable, hungry to learn, humble, versus maybe somebody that comes with a ton of experience, but maybe they've got some pride or arrogance about them. You're looking for just character, is what I heard you say.
Yeah, I believe that's accurate. The ability to trust a partner, in my opinion, trumps everything else. And I recognize there's industries where a certain sort of technical expertise or experience is likely a must-have. I don't work in any of those. The quality of the person is the delineator.
Let's open it up to questions too. So please get in the chat if you're on the Zoom. If you're listening to this on audio podcast or watching on YouTube, we record this the last Monday of every month, and then it's available a week later on our feeds. But you can join heartbeat.chat in the show notes, and you can watch this live, ask questions live, and we'll take a couple questions. Dalton writes, "Thank you, Dave, Rex, and Mark. How do you all serve God in secular work? Any practical steps on bringing faith into work in a world that is easily offended?"
If I know Dalton, shout out Dalton Rogers, great young man here in Indy. I think that's Dalton. I don't know.
Yeah, Dalton Rogers.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Dalton, I would just say, as somebody that grew up very churched in a Baptist sort of setting, a lot of good things, but probably some things that I'd probably leave from a fundamentalist, at times legalist view. And so I don't really have this secular sacred divide in terms of how I live my life. The greatest gift of the gospel is I can take it anywhere, right? No metal detector is going to pick it up. No, nothing like that. It animates everything I do. And does that mean that I'm asking to pray before every breakfast or lunch with someone in the business? No, sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't. And I think it's more, obviously, for those of us that have accepted Christ as our Lord and Savior, the light of Christ is in you. And so sometimes it's just being salt and light. It's not trying to proselytize or evangelize every person you come across in business. And so I think when you animate your life with care and intentionality, that people may not know exactly what it is or put their thumb on it, but I think it leaves a lasting impression. And we all have bad days, and there's days where I'm sure I don't exhibit those traits of a Christ follower, and we're all human, and so that's perfectly okay. Just getting up each day and saying, God, give me grace today in my interactions that hopefully I can just represent you well and be salt and light.
Sir Mark, anything to add to that?
I think walking into interactions with individuals from a curious place of where they're at, being willing to ask good questions, and then when it's helpful, share some of your own story from a place of vulnerability. I think sharing your failures with others is so, you can almost see the sigh of relief when you tell someone about the dumpster fire, right? And from a place of, I survived and got through it, and here's how that played out. I think there are opportunities to engage people, where they're at with our story that is tremendously helpful. And I don't think you can do that as someone who knows the Lord and walks in that faith, imperfectly as it may be, but not have that as a big part of the thread that's woven throughout that day to day.
So while we're waiting for more questions, I have a question. You earlier said you moved to Fountain Square and had a challenging time. I'm thinking about my family's progression. Start near the city, move to Plainfield. Now they're in Amo, right? Getting further out. That's almost the reverse trajectory of start near the city and move outwards towards the suburbs. You both have invested your time, energy in the city. I went from Plainfield, Greenwood, to living near Mark down in Fall Creek Place. I love it. It's totally changed my view of city living, of so much. Why invest in the city? Make the case for living in the city and working in the city, especially through the lens of the gospel.
I've talked a lot about this because of my work. It has been in helping people buy houses. So it ends up in conversation. To be clear, I think a Christian is called to be missional where they live, period. I personally do not view my choice to live downtown as a particular missional calling. I don't live downtown because I think God called me to a mission downtown. I live downtown because I love it. It's a great place to live. I believe it's great for my family. I think there's plenty of upsides. I enjoy it. I'm incredibly grateful to live where we live because we live there. I think that's where God calls us, to love your neighbor, which is incredibly hard wherever you live. I grew up in a smaller town. I've lived in a couple different university towns. I've lived in a suburban environment now for 20 years. I live downtown. So I think there may be at times in the Christian faith, I've encountered this idea, even my own Christian community, maybe unintentionally, this sense of living in an urban environment is somehow superior or preferable for a Christian to do. That's not my personal conviction. I don't think that's good theology. I think God puts you in a place and says, love your neighbor. Yes, that looks different in an urban environment than it would in farmland. So I don't know if I answered the question.
Sure.
I would just say it's where he's put us.
Why do you like living downtown? Let me ask that.
Yeah, proximity to a lot of things, higher concentration of relationships, the ability to interact on a regular, frequent basis with a lot of people, many of whom have less in common with us. I think the environments that I have lived in until the last 20 years, the higher percentage of the people that I was interacting with on a day-to-day basis were a lot like me. Now, granted, a lot of the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis still are like me. But I think that's the primary value for me of an urban environment. It is great for me to interact with a wider set of people and to do it more often.
I think I'd add on to that as well. One of the most powerful opportunities I believe we get is the decision to remove the billion other options in life. So when I decided to get married, we removed all the other options, right? When my wife and I decided to become parents, when I decided to move to Fountain Square, and I say regularly, my next move is in a bag. I'm not going anywhere. The impact of that in my life, to know I have that anchor within which every decision I make is helping to guide me through what I'm doing, has been tremendously powerful.
There's a great book called The Power of Place. It's a Christian book that challenges the idea of mobility. You're constantly being mobile, right? What I hear, it triggers a lot of that, like the dedication to moving to a place and investing in that place, as opposed to saying, this neighborhood, or we're having these conversations, maybe our school isn't as good as Center Groves or Plainfields. Maybe we could go there, right? Sure. Having those options. Why remove that option? What was the thinking there, and why invest in a place and build roots in a geographical location?
For me, I think it started out, for my growing up as a kid, we moved like we were running from the mob. We got here and I hadn't lived anywhere more than 5 years. I think I averaged about 2.5 up until getting to Fountain Square. But then what I saw is, if I'm always thinking about where we may live next, that's taking up and diluting down my ability to make other decisions, right? So when Gabby and I set the stake down and said, this is where we're going to be, we were able to make decisions so much more effectively and aligned together that it brought a tremendous load off, and helped us step towards each other in hard decisions.
Dave or Don, any final question? Mark, please
Well,
speak
I
to
just
that.
gotta piggyback for just a quick second. I think with my limited experience in life, advice that I would give to people is, don't be quick to change your setting to solve a problem, because human beings are challenging. I think about this in the context of what church are you a part of? What neighborhood do you live in? What school system do you go to? How do you educate your kids? Do you have kids? It is very easy as a human being to see the solution as like a different environment. What you do for work is similar. I've seen so many people change those things, have the honeymoon phase of, yes, the problem that we used to deal with is better. And then, of course, what you discover is church, work environment, community, neighborhood has its own set of problems. You brought some of them with you because you're messed up. So I think that's a part of the beauty of like place in Roots is being very slow. So yes, there's a time, there's very valid reasons to change environment, to change workplaces, to change church communities, but be really slow to do that, because you're just going to find a new set of challenges.
Final thoughts from Don, Dave? Anything you'd like to say or ask?
No, this has been great, guys. We also live in Butler, Tarkington, and I think your comments, Tim Keller, God rest his soul, once talked about marriage being a covenant relationship versus dating's consumeristic, right? You're like, better comes along, I'll drop this and swap it out for that. And so I think that same framework can apply to how you dig in with a church or a neighborhood or a community, a school community for that matter, doesn't mean you're never going to leave this church, but to really say, hey, despite sort of the ups and downs, we're committed, we're in a covenant. That's why churches have covenant members, right, to being here. And so I think that's a really good word. So much of our society, unfortunately, people just, opt in and opt out based on if they had one bad day. And so it's okay to have a healthy struggle with 4 kids. It's something I'm trying to model and impart to them, that you're not just going to win at everything in life. It's good to live in that healthy struggle, and that's a lot of life.
Yeah, a world of algorithms that are constantly suiting our needs isn't always healthy. Don?
I would say, as I was struck by the conversation and by Dalton's question, that one way I think to bring Christ into the workplace is on your knees to start the day. And that sounds really simple, but I can't tell you the number of days that I do my workout, that I have an 8 o'clock meeting and think, I forgot that step. An old mentor of mine, Marty Moore, used to say he prayed every day, lead me where you need me. Mm-hmm. Just today, right? And so the conversations that I would have, I'm looking for God to show up. And instead of worrying about, we all have worries. I've got a few worries right now about my family. To put those written down, say, Lord, I give these to you, and I believe you have angels, and I believe that there's the Holy Spirit. And just bless me in this day. Give me courage if I have problems that I'm having to deal with. And give me the love and peace that would be representative of you.
Don, thank you for that wisdom, and thank you to Dave Neff for co-hosting this episode. We miss Greg, but you did a great job. And then thank you to Mark and Rex. Thank you both for sharing all your life lessons and wisdom with our audience.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for doing the podcast. This is great.
Yeah, this is Don and Greg. They really want to give back and make sure that through Citizen 7, you're empowered, that you're meeting folks that can build relationships like Mark and Rex have. And so you can join them at their meetings. And then you can also, there's a new citizen7indy.com website coming soon. You can join heartbeat.chat, connect with other members, and continue to share the podcast. That is a great way to help grow this network. And stay tuned for more next month. We will talk about who that might be, but we'll be back in the last week, the 4th week of the month. Thanks so much for listening to Big Hearted Indy.